Okay, so probably we can just start and then let's just wait for them to come in a bit. Okay, so good morning everyone. Today we will be discussing the art of pastry. Okay, you've been in the pastry kitchen for a while, uh, but we need to do some refinement in terms of the artistry and creativity that you guys will be needing for the pastry kitchen. Okay. So before we start, let's do an attendance check. Let me ask everybody to turn on their cameras. Cameras on, everyone. Wait lang. Okay, let me do your attendance check. Okay, let's start first sa baba ng attendance list ko. Jen, are you here? Jen, wala pa. Sandra,
Good morning, Chef.
good morning. Noemi, wala. There's, ano dyan mo pa, okay. Jules, not yet here. Keith, si Keith pa pumapasok pa, parang hindi na yata pumapasok si Keith. Hindi na, no? Papasok pa ba sa Hanson?
Pumapasok naman po.
Siya yung late, siya yung maagang umalis. Hey, Jay, good morning.
Morning. Morning, Chef.
Morning. Leo, morning.
Morning, Chef.
Sofia, wala dito. Mitzi, not yet here. Gemma,
Good morning, Chef.
good morning. Cyrus,
Morning, Chef.
morning. Jeff,
Good morning, Chef.
morning. Eden, and Catherine. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay, tama ba? Everybody nakawag?
Tawag.
Okay, ayan.
Chef, di mo ko natawag.
Ay, sino yan?
Siyan po.
Si?
Siyan po, Clint J.
Okay, Kiel. Okay. Pamili.
Present.
Okay. Okay. Nasa kabilang screen kasi yung aking attendance. Okay. So, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay. So today, we can actually turn off our cameras. Ay, wait. Nalimutan ko pala mag-screenshot. Wait. Bilis naman nila Sandra magpatay. Okay. Wait a minute. Okay, wait. Okay, 1, 2, 3. Alright. Okay, so today, we can turn it off na. Okay, today we will be discussing your the art of pastry. Okay, so ano yung sabihin the art of pastry? In some culinary school, okay, you can see that they give a heavy importance on the artwork or creativity that is needed that is needed in creating very artistic desserts. Okay, not only desserts but also bread. So there's a finesse, there's an art. It's a form of an artwork. It's a form of an expression, okay, of the baker, of the pastry chef, of the student. So it's one way of their of expressing themselves. Okay, so when we started our journey in culinary, diba, I was mentioning that culinary is not only about cooking; it's about science, it's about art. With pastry, you give a heavier importance on the art form. Okay, hindi lang siya technique. Okay, medyo science na nga yung pastry natin kasi very specific siya, very exact. Exact in terms of measurements, exact of temperature, exact in the techniques. But this is also heavy in art kasi with pastry, your priority is to make your dishes as appealing, visually appealing, okay, before even tasting it. So dapat mas lagi siyang mukhang masarap. Even if it's just a simple bread, okay, your loaf, dapat mukha siyang masarap even before tasting it. Okay? So when we are working on the different shapes and sizes, okay, it's important that as students, you give importance to understanding the principles of design. Okay, so in some culinaries, actually in US culinary schools, as part of their pastry course, they have art classes. So they start painting. Okay? Para maintindihan yung color combinations, maintindihan nila yung different strokes. Okay? So ganon ka artistic yung pastry field, where you need to go deeper into the arts, in terms of understanding the history of arts. You do art appreciation classes. You do painting classes na totally different from pastry. Okay, the art of pastry is what grabs people's attention. Okay, it is what makes your Danish pastry different, or it makes it stand out from the crowd. Yung ginawa niyong pastries, okay? Hindi lang kayo gumagawa ng simple pandesal. Actually, even ang pandesal, from the looks of your pandesal, di ba, yung generic pandesal, alam mo kaagad kung masarap itsura ng pandesal or mukha siyang matigas. Okay? It's an expression. It's an art form. Even the way you need yung pagmamasa, it's a dance for it when you are taking up full pastry. Okay? So may sequence, meron ka slap and fold. Okay, meron kang kneading ng one hand. Okay, so these are movements, rhythmic movements that seems to follow a music. So meron siyang expression of yourself. Okay, so today we will be discussing the different shapes, sizes, and colors, and how we can introduce these simple techniques. Okay, we go back to the basics of the arts of pastry. Okay, on how to do it. Okay, I asked permission from your chef. Okay, si Chef Cecil, tama ba? Pastry? Tama, no? Chef, tama? Chef, are you there?
Ano po yun, Chef? Nagkuha ko ng tubig.
Ano name ni Chef Cecil, di ba?
Parang tama, Chef. Chef.
Hindi kayo sigurado.
Chef.
Oo, si Chef Cecil. Tama, di ba, Leo?
Cecilia po.
Saan yun?
Cecilia po.
Cecilia, yes. Oh, Cecilia. Okay. So I asked the permission of Chef Cecil if I can include this topic. Okay, so okay naman siya. So this is the arts of pastry. Okay, so we start first with shaping your bread. Okay, these are observations, okay. We will expand your knowledge into the different shapes. So hindi kayo nag-experiment. Nakita ko kasi that you guys were playing around with the laminated dough. First, mahirap gumawa ng laminated dough, and ang daming sayang, ang daming scrap, ang daming leftover na pinaglaralan nyo lang na hindi na alam ito gagawin. Okay? So, if you understand how difficult it is to make laminated dough, siguro naman na-try nyo yung pag-roll, pag-rest, you have your temperature control, hindi na sasayangin. Okay? So, in terms of bread shaping, when we discuss French French-inspired bread. So marami kasing types of bread, like pita bread, you have here. But French-inspired bread. There are two classic shapes that you guys need to know. Hindi ito yung baguette or bagel or your brioche. There are two classic shapes that you guys need to understand. Your ball, okay? Your ball bread, okay? This is yung ball shape, okay? It's one of the symbols of the baker, okay? I'm not sure if you guys added your, di ba, meron akong, hindi ko lang kasi sinabihan ko kasi once you got out, you had your bread out in the oven. Nag-uunahan kayo, akin yan. Sabi ko, hindi ko kasi kayo naglagay ng signature. Okay? That signature that I was looking for, but not it shouldn't be present in laminated bread. But the way the baker adds in their signature is by scoring. Scoring is the process of adding parang signature vents on top of your bread. Ito yung mga nilalagay na slits on top. This is where your air can come out. It's also a way for your bakers to identify kung kaninong bread. In the earlier centuries, they were using a parang communal oven. So malaki lang siyang oven na anybody can put in their bread. So para ma-identify nila kung ay bread ko yan, bread to ng neighbor ko, bread to ng kakarating lang. They use that scoring para makita nila kung ano yung sa kanila. So some would score it in a leaf pattern, some would score it na rectangular lang, some would score it in a different way. Okay? So the ball bread is a generic ball shape. Okay? So this is where you get your boulanger. Okay? Kasi bread makers are called boulanger. Okay? So dyan natin kinuha yung term na yan. So everybody in the bread, if you're bread baking, would know and understand how to make your ball bread. Okay, so these are large loaves. Usually the outer crust is very thick. Okay, so very crunchy. Okay, while the inside is soft and tender. So ideal siya for mga, this is your typical shape for your sourdough. Okay. And then you have your oblong shape, buttered. Okay, the buttered is a shape of a loaf that is parang more like a parang shorter version of your French baguette. Okay, it's a football size lang. So instead na pandesal shape ang French bread or boulanger, dalawa yung shape na kaya, your ball and your buttered. Okay. Iba-ibang use yan. Your butter, they use for sandwiches. Your bollard, you can use it by slicing it in individual slices. You can create your sandwich. Okay? So to understand the different shapes and sizes and how to make it, okay, so we will have just multiple videos today. Okay, so just relax, sit back, okay, and then we will be focusing on how to shape these different types of breads.
Ang 40D, tumutulong patibayin ng vital organs, iwas sakit sa puso at iba pang
Okay,
sakit.
sorry sa ads, ha?
I'm Peter Endres, head baker of Runner and Stone, and I'm here to show you how to shape every bread. It's a really common shape. You're going to see it in every bakery. Boule means ball in French. The first step of this is going to be pulling all the sides of the dough in towards the center, kind of creating like a little package or a little dumpling shape there. We're going to flip that over. I'm not going to flour the board too much because I do want the dough to stick to the board a little bit, and you'll see why. I'm going to push the dough in one direction. That's going to create some tension in this direction. And so the gluten is what we're working with now. As I push this dough, we're trying to stretch the dough in this direction. I'm going to push that in all different angles. We want to keep doing this motion, pulling the bread, so we have a nice smooth surface on the top of that bowl. So we're going to go ahead and proof this on this proofing board. we have our boule that has proofed for about 2 to 3 hours. So a good way to check if your bread is ready to bake, if its final fermentation is complete, is to just give it a poke. So we want that indent to stay a little bit. If it was springing back entirely and erase the indent you made, it might need a little more time. To score breads in a professional kitchen, we'll use what we call a lame. It's basically going to hold a razor blade. I'm going to put this razor blade on the lame here. What we're going to do is a box score. So we're going to score around the edges of this bread, and that's going to allow this bread to open laterally. One key thing with this, you can see it here, you want to make sure that those two cuts connect. If not, this little bridge of dough is going to pinch that dough together as it bakes in the oven. The bread's going to bake out like this instead of baking in a nice round, which is what we're intending for it. So I'm going to go ahead and make sure that those two cross over. To finish it, I'm also going to just put a little decorative mark here. Here we have our final baked boule. A great way to test if breads are done is right when they come out of the oven. You could turn them over, just do a real quick tap on the bottom. So it has a nice hollow drum sound to it, tells me that it was baked correctly. So the interior of this bread is going to be a little bit tighter than some of the other shapes that we'll see, both because of the shape and because of the dough. We're going to be using a brioche dough for this. So we're going to take a 100-gram piece of dough here. We're going to pull all the edges towards the center, making like a little dumpling shape. Flip that over. And then just as we did with the boule, where we're going to be drawing the sides in towards the bottom of the dough to build some round surface tension, we're going to be doing that but with our hand. So we're going to push the dough towards the table. We're going to push the dough towards the table in all different directions. And while we're doing it, we're kind of using this whole surface of our hand to move the dough in that circular motion. If you wanted more of a hamburger bun shape, you're going to flatten that dough a little bit. So just going to push it down so that when it proofs, it doesn't turn into like a ball shape, but more of that classic hamburger bun shape. And then this we're going to set to proof on a piece of parchment paper. This is our final roll. Once it was about double its original size when we shaped it, we gave it an egg wash. So let's cut this open, we'll see what the interior. For a brioche dough like this, you're generally going to have a nice even crumb is what you're looking for. It's going to be nice and soft. So chapeau means hat in French. It's literally going to be a little roll with a tiny little dough hat on top of it. So we're going to start by shaping the roll pretty similar to any roll. We're going to be pulling the sides in, flip that over, and pushing the dough into the board so that it draws towards the center. And then we're going to take a piece of the same dough, and we're going to roll that out. So I pre-rolled out a piece here. We're going to flour this liberally because we don't want this to stick to our roll. We want this to stay clear of our roll so that it bakes up and forms like a little cracker on top of the roll. We're going to cut a little disc there, and then I'm going to flip this over. So this is the top surface of our roll. Ultimately, it's going to be a top surface. There's a little belly button that we have on the bottom of the dough, and we're going to push my finger really right down to the board. So what that does is lock that cap right on top of the roll, and then we'll fold that over. This is the final shape. Here's our final chapeau roll. You can see that the roll underneath proofed up, but the top part kind of stays as a cracker. When it bakes, the cracker actually peels away from the bread a little bit. So you wind up having two textures in one roll. It's going to be essentially round brioche shape again. And the difference this time is going to be how we proof the dough. So after we have our round shape, nice surface tension built on that, we're going to put it on the tray with the others. This is going to be nice because the Parker House rolls, when they proof, they're going to proof upwards, and it gives you a much different texture than a regular brioche roll would have. So here's our final Parker House rolls out of the oven. These were egg washed before going in, and then you can see that they really proofed all together, so they have a really great interior, really nice texture. They stay fresh for a good amount of time because of the height on them, and they're really delicious bread. Yum. Brioche à tête literally means brioche with a head, and that is what it winds up being. This bread has a pre-shape, so we're going to do a round pre-shape. Pre-shape is going to be an intermediate shape between the cut dough and the final shape. So once we have this in a round, we're going to let this rest for 15-20 minutes, just set this aside, and then we're going to carry on to the final shape. It's nice that you can see that it's loosened up a little bit. we're going to do the final shape with this. So I'm going to take a little bit of flour. I'm going to turn this roll on its side, and I'm going to roll it with my finger here to kind of get like a bowling pin. So I have a little top knot here. I'm going to take this top knot, and I'm going to push it down into the dough. So that's the first stage. And then we're just going to make sure that that little head part, so this would be the head, the tête, and the brioche à tête, is going to lock in there. I'm going to use my fingers and just push right down to the wood board here to really lock that dough in there. And the characteristic mold for this brioche à tête is often a fluted tart mold like this. We're going to oil it. So put a little bit of oil in there. Just brush that up. And then we're going to go ahead and place the final shape in the tart mold. Okay, here we have our final brioche à tête. You can tell by the fact that the head is still on it that we proofed it the correct amount of time. Right before the bake, I brushed it with a little bit of egg wash and finished it with pearl sugar, which is pretty typical for this shape. So we're going to unmold this, and I can cut this in half, show you what the interior is like. This again is a brioche dough, so it should have a nice even crumb, nice even interior. It's nice and soft and airy. Next, we're going to be shaping the baguette, which is kind of like the holy grail of French breads. Everyone knows it. If I go to a French bakery, it's going to be the bread that I'm going to try first to decide if I'm going to try anything else at that bakery. Up till now, we've been doing exclusively round shapes. So this is going to have a different pre-shape and then also a different final shape, which is going to lead us to what you know to be the baguette shape. The pre-shape is going to be a little like a small football shape, and it's going to be an intermediate shape between this piece of dough and the ultimate baguette shape. So while we're pre-shaping, what I'm doing is building some tension in this direction, which is going to be important to help our baguette hold up both in the final proof and in the oven. And I'm also kind of extending it a little bit. So basically an intermediate between that piece of dough and what will be the baguette dough. All right, so my baguette pre-shapes have rested for about 15 to 20 minutes. We're going to go into the final shape. First thing I'm going to do is flip it over. So after I did the pre-shape, there was a bit of a seam on the bottom. I'm going to flip that over so that the seam is on top now. I'm going to give that a light stretch. The first step in the baguette shaping is going to be to fold the top down, folding this down and pushing back against the dough. Next step is going to be imagining a line right here. I'm going to bring that line to the edge and form a seam. So I'm catching it with the heel of my hand, pulling it down. Close it out. Here's where we our hands over, and we're going to just bring that dough out to the length that we want. On the end, I'm going to taper it, so just push down a little bit on the board, and that's basically our shape. So after we're done elongating it, we're going to have a seam on the bottom. We're going to put that seam in some flour, and then we're going to bring our couche up. It's a linen cloth that we proof bread on, so it's pretty well tempered with flour, so nothing really sticks to it. And then, as you'll see, we'll put that baguette shape there, seam side down, and we'll use the couche to actually support it into its baguette shape. So this you can continue to shape, put multiple baguettes in here. This has rested for about 20 minutes, ready to go in the oven. We want to score along the center line of the baguette, so open this way and have like a nice oval cross section. We're going to do 5 cuts on this, so I'm going to imagine the middle cut is going to be right here, the third cut. So I'm going to go ahead and just start the cuts. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. All right, so here we have our 2 final baked baguettes. You can see they have a nice golden brown crispy crust on them. You see the results of our 5 scores here. When we scored them along the center line of the baguette. You can see now how those scores have opened as a result of both our good shaping and some good fermentation in that dough. Really great characteristic of the baguette and a sign of some good shaping is when you get a little bit of ridge here, what we would call the ears of the baguette. So we'll go ahead and cut these open. This is a great crumb for a baguette. What you're looking for is nice open whole structure. There's a little bit of regularity to it, but for the most part, it's through the entire cross-section of the baguette, and I would love to eat some. Nice. Perfect. The epi comes from the final baguette shape. So this is our final baguette shape. We've already been through the pre-shape on this. It's relaxed.
Mag-Bear Brand Adult Plus. Proven na tumutulong para 100% kumpleto sa tibay nutrients.
Relaxed. It's proofed for about 20 minutes and it's ready to be baked. So right before the bake, we're going to cut this baguette shape into the epi shape. Epi is French for shaft, as in a shaft of wheat. So the final shape on this ultimately should look like a shaft of wheat. So we're just using our scissors at an angle, being sure not to cut all the way through the bread, so there's still a little bit of a connection here so that that stays together in the final bake. And then this is ready to go in the oven. You can see that the bread opens where we cut it a little bit, which preserves the open interior that a baguette would have. The end result is that it's kind of a series of pull-apart rolls. Batard in French actually means bastard, and so it was said that this was kind of between a boule and a baguette, so it was like a bastard of a shape between those two shapes. So we're going to do a round pre-shape on this. Again, we don't want this. This is just a pre-shape, so we don't need it to be really tight. So we're going to set this aside, let this rest. So we have the pre-shape here. The seam, so to speak, is on the bottom at this point. I'm going to flip that over on a lightly floured surface. We're going to fold down the top, similar to the baguette shape, push back a little bit. We're building strength in this direction again to give that batard the height and lift it needs in the oven. As a final step for this, we're going to seal it closed. And similar to the baguette shape, which was just sealed in one direction, this is going to be sealed all towards the center so that it gives you that football shape that's classic for a batard. So I'm going to start on one end, I'm going to draw that down and seal it. And sealing all towards the center point here. So you can see already that that has like a half moon shape to it. We're going to bring that forward and just give it a little bit of a roll to bring those edges out. We have a seam here. The seam's going to go on the bottom as that proofs. And then right before baking, we're going to score this as well. So a good typical score that you see a lot is right down the center line, 2 cuts. And that's going to allow the bread to open again. So here is the final baked batard. You can see the 2 scores that I did. So we're going to go ahead and cut this open, check out the interior. There you go. You can see we have decently open, similar to the boule. This will be a great general all-purpose loaf. So we did a round pre-shape on this earlier. We're going to be shaping this round pre-shape into a batard shape. This is essentially a second pre-shape. So we're going to do the batard shaping again, folding that all over towards the center. We're going to let this batard sit in this shape for about 15-20 minutes. And then we're going to get a rolling pin and do the final shape of the fondue. We're going to put a pretty good amount of flour on the board for this one. I'm going to roll the bread in the flour. I'm going to use the rolling pin to pleat the center of it. I'm going really firmly on this right down to the board. And that's going to really lock that center of dough together and essentially change the shape of the dough. We're going to pinch the sides together. And then this gives us our final fondue shape. All right, here we have our final fondue shape out of the oven. So you can kind of see the way that that center pleat expresses itself in the bake. It holds down the bread and gives you 2 pieces that have some good volume to them, similar to a baguette that was unscored. It adds a little variation to the look of the final shape, and it's pretty attractive. Right, so we're going to be making a few braided loaves here. We're going to be doing a single strand, a 3-strand, and a 6-strand braided loaf. We're using a brioche dough here, an enriched dough. So we're going to start with a rectangular pre-shape. So I'm going to pull the dough down so that the rope will have some structure to it. We're going to do a series of those to get all of our pre-shapes ready. All right, so we let our strands rest. So now I'm going to get them into their final pre-shape for the braid. So I'm just going to elongate them a little bit more and taper the ends. So now we have all our strands ready for our 6-3 and our single strand loaf. So we're going to go ahead and start with our single strand braid, which is essentially a form of a knot that we're going to make with 1 strand. So we're going to carry that over about in thirds, 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. We're going to thread this one through. We're going to twist that and pull that end right through there. Gives you like a nice little knot shape. We're going to move into our 3-strand braid. So we're going to first start by kind of putting those 3 strands together. And then we're going to do a typical braid here. So just one over the other. Not pulling too tight. We don't want too much tension. We might start to rip the dough. And then when we get to the end, we're going to pinch those ends together. Same thing here. We're going to pinch those ends together. And then what I like to do to clean this up is flip it over. You could bring all those tips, just pinch them in a little bit on the bottom. And then when you turn the dough over, you have a nice clean 3-strand braid. Now for the 6-strand braid. This one, we are going to bring them all together like we did with the 3-strand. We're going to pinch the tips together. We're going to pull one up and over. And then I'm going to pull this first strand over here. Bring this one down with this group. Don't worry about this part here. We'll clean that up at the end. Pull this one across, keeping these in 2 separate segments here. And then pull this down. Pull across and down. Across and down. You see I'm doing it pretty loose too again so we don't have any tearing. Across and down, across. Ken, when you get to the end, you're gonna just pinch together the end pieces here, like we did with the other braid, pinch them together. Again, we're gonna flip that over, bring the pieces up, pinch them on the bottom to hide all our straggly ends there, give that a nice roll, and then we have a 6-stranded braid. Here are our final baked loaves. You can see kind of how forgiving they are, and they wind up looking pretty nice even if your braiding's not perfect. I finished the single and the 3-strand with some egg wash and pearl sugar, and the 6-strand has just some egg wash on it. This again was made with a brioche dough, so nice even crumb, and would be a perfect vehicle for some butter and some jam, or to just rip off and eat. Does the trick. We're going to be shaping the Kaiser roll from a semolina dough. Gives it a little more extensibility, which will be great for this shape because it's pretty intense. So we're going to start with a piece of dough and give it a rectangular pre-shape. And then that's our first pre-shape. So we're going to let this rest, and then I'll show you how to knot a Kaiser roll. Rectangular pre-shape for our Kaiser roll has rested. It's going to allow me to extend it a little bit more. We're going to give ourselves pretty good rope here. And then we're essentially going to tie this into a knot, but it's going to be key that we go through on both ends of this knot. And then we're going to connect the ends, give them a little pinch, flip that over, gives you that classic Kaiser star on the front of it. We could also finish this with poppy seed is a really nice option for this. So just put a little bit of water on that, dip that right into the seeds. And then we're going to set this on a pan, and that's going to proof. Here we have our final baked Kaiser roll with poppy seeds on it. You can see how what was originally a knot shape kind of proofed together and gave us that nice characteristic star shape on top of the roll. This has a great interior. You can see a little evidence of the shaping, but for the most part, this proofed together. Go ahead and give this a try. Delicious. Very mild bread, nice thin crust, just missing a fried egg. All right, next we're going to be shaping an iconic New York bread, the bagel. I'm using a semolina dough here for ease of extensibility. So we did a rectangular pre-shape on this earlier. We're going to extend this out, connect the ends, and then we're going to roll those ends together to form that classic ring shape. And there's your bagel. After this final shape, it's going to proof for a little bit. This shape then gets boiled, typically in some water with a little bit of malt syrup in it, and then it gets put into an oven and baked. Okay, here we have our final boiled and baked bagel. You see a pretty typical tight crumb, nice chewy interior, and a light crisp on the outside, which comes from that boil, and then the final bake. Pretzel has 2 pre-shapes. So it starts with a round pre-shape, and then we're going to go into a second pre-shape, which is a rectangular pre-shape. And so we're going to fold that down and then I'm going to elongate it just to start it on that shape towards pretzel. And now we're going to let this pre-shape rest for another 20 minutes. All right, now we have the final shape. We're going to roll it out to give it a little bit more length and get it closer to the strand length that we need for the pretzel. We're going to take these two arms here, cross them over twice, and then flip them into the center, connect them to the body of the dough here. They usually get a score across the bottom here, and there you have your classic pretzel shape. All right, here we have our final baked pretzel. So this pretzel rested in the refrigerator for 20 to 30 minutes. Once it's firmed up, it gets dipped in a solution of lye, and then it gets baked till it's got a nice golden brown color. Pretty typical bread shape. The Pullman is a reference to Pullman railroad car, a boxcar. It's where it got its shape from, if you imagine the wheels down here. So a rectangular bread is going to be dictated by the dimensions of the pan, essentially. So for the rectangular pre-shape, we're just going to fold this down. We're going to try and give a little bit of length on this. We're going to fold that down. So that is our pre-shape. We're going to let this rest for 15-20 minutes. We're going to do the final shape on this one. So I have the seam from the pre-shape is on the bottom at this point. I'm going to flip it over so that we have the seam on top. And I'm going to give it another fold down. Again, introducing some more tension in this direction to give that pan loaf a nice dome on top. And I'm going to seal this similar to the way we did with the baguette to lock in all that tension that I've built. And then we will just roll it out. Once that's done, seam side down. I'm going to go ahead and oil the pan lightly. This loaf is rather large, probably going to take a bit to proof. We're going to put this in, seam side down, give it a little bit of a dusting, and then just push that in there just to extend it out so that it's the whole shape of the pan. All right, here's our baked Pullman loaf. Perfect. So a nice even crumb, interior is nice and moist still. Perfect for your picnic. This is what I would call a batter bread. Right here I have 100% rye. So rye has protein in it, has gluten in it, but not a type of gluten that's usable in building structure. So 100% rye is always going to be a little bit wetter. This one is basically going to be oiling a pan and scraping the batter into the pan. But there's really no shaping involved and no pre-shaping. So I'm going to go ahead and scrape this in. So this is about 2 kilos of 100% rye dough, and that'll be good for this Pullman here. It is yeasted, it's a sourdough bread, so it will rise, and we do need some room for that. So basically it's going to go in like that. I'll wet my hands here, and we can just pat down this batter so that it rises evenly across the dough. And a nice way to finish this is with a little bit of rye flour. Just gives you like a nice crackly finish on the final loaf. All right, so here is a segment of our 100% rye Pullman. This bread's really nice, sliced thin in my opinion. It's a very full flavored bread. It's got a lot of sour to it. It's really great with butter because that fat kind of like works nicely with the sour on it. It's also really great with smoked fish, like smoked salmon, smoked trout. Again, the fattiness of those fishes plays really well with a sour bread like this. It's not really a shape on the focaccia. We're going to olive oil a pan pretty liberally. So we're going to take a very wet dough. It's an 80% hydration white wheat dough. You can see why we're using a lot of olive oil here. And we're going to just spread that on the pan. I'm going to put a little bit on top also. We're going to be spreading this gradually over the course of maybe an hour. So it's okay if the top's a little bit oiled. It'll be a lot easier to manage that way. So we're going to just let this sit for about half an hour after it's got to the final shape. This has sat for maybe about an hour in total. I was spreading it every 15-20 minutes until it filled out the pan. Right before putting it in the oven, you can go ahead and finish this with some rosemary and some Maldon salt. Would be real nice. Here we have our finished focaccia. You can see that it got some nice golden color. It's still also very soft and flexible, so it has some nice moisture in it still. If you overcook this, it can get a little too crispy. So we're gonna go ahead and cut it open and see what the interior looks like. So you can see already, the interior looks really nice here. We got some nice open crumb structure. Perfect. Ciabatta is a really easy bread to shape. It's also going to be a really wet dough. So ciabatta actually means slipper in Italian. The final bread shape is kind of going to look like a very flat-footed slipper. So the final shape here, I'm going to dust the center a little bit, and we're just going to fold the dough over once, fold it over again. Now it's sitting on that seam I created, and that's basically it. Right before we go ahead and bake that, we're going to flip that over. So what was the top side will become the bottom of the loaf, and that seam that we created could open in the oven a little bit and create a little bit of ridge, a little bit of texture on that bread, which not only looks nice, but also adds a nice component to the mouthfeel. So here we have our final baked ciabatta. It has a nice crust on it, so you can see evidence of the nice open whole crumb structure here. It's got some nice characteristic ciabatta crunch there. Really nice, really light. Bread that goes with everything. Would be especially perfect dipped in some great olive oil. Next we're going to be shaping, or maybe more accurately cutting, English muffins. So English muffins are a yeasted dough as well. We're using a whole wheat dough here. You're going to take the English muffin dough and just give it a light roll out. You want it to be about, half an inch thick. So we're going to go ahead and let this dough rest for about 15-20 minutes. This dough is nice and relaxed. When we cut our circles using our ring mold, they're going to stay as circles. So go ahead and cut. And we're going to let these rest in this final cut shape on a sheet tray with a little bit of cornmeal. So the cornmeal both helps that English muffin not stick to the pan, and also it's going to give us a nice little texture on the bottom when we griddle them. So here we have our final English muffins. These have been griddled and finished in the oven. So you can see a little bit of cornmeal left on here. This is the surface that we proofed the English muffin. It sat on that cornmeal. Instead of using a knife to cut them, I like to split them with a fork. It gives you nice little nooks and crannies there that once you toast it will hold all that butter you're going to put on it. And then you'll open that up. You have a really nice open interior on that English muffin. So that's what we're looking for, all those little crooks and crags in there.
Give your best with our Chocolatiest Red Ribbon Triple Chocolate Roll.
Next, we're going to make fougasse, which is a really beautiful shape. We're going to be using a whole wheat dough for this. We're going to start with a triangular pre-shape, which is the first time we're going to see that, and pretty specific to this. We're just going to fold in the side here. We're going to fold in the other side. You can see the beginning of that triangle, and then real simply just fold up the bottom. So we have that in a triangle now. So we're going to let this rest for about 15-20 minutes, and then we're going to come back and roll it out. And then just really lightly roll this out. We don't want to eliminate all those air bubbles that we have in there from the fermentation. We want to keep this nice and light. We just want to get it into what will ultimately be our final fougasse shape. It's nice and relaxed. So we can go ahead and put this on a sheet tray. So I'm going to go ahead and cut it right down the middle. Spread so you can see that opening. It'll also give you some nice crust surfaces here. And then the rest of the design is really up to you. I'm just using a plastic bench scraper here. You could use a credit card if you have one. You could use a knife too. Just be careful, you don't want to cut through the parchment underneath. And once you have those cuts, go ahead and spread those out. So you can see the pattern of cuts here. The dough is really nicely rested. If it hadn't been rested, that gluten structure kind of would have taken over and closed these holes right back up. It's really great to rip apart and use in dips. Also just eat on its own. The lavash that we're going to make is a crispy lavash. It's essentially going to be a cracker. We're gonna start with a whole wheat dough. We're gonna start by just rolling it out a little bit with a rolling pin. I wanna keep that nice and floured. Once we have it about here, I'm gonna go ahead and put it on the back of an oiled sheet tray. So this is gonna be our new spreading surface for this so that we can get it nice and thin. So I'm gonna oil that up, make sure the dough doesn't stick to it. And we'll go ahead and throw that dough right on there. We're gonna let this rest for 15 to 20 minutes here. We're gonna go ahead and start to spread this out. So I'm just gonna very gently spread this. I'm spreading from the center so that we don't have a thick part in the middle and thin pieces around the edge. We wanna get this as even as possible. So keep spreading this around. Look like we're pretty much there. Don't worry about the little edge parts here. We're gonna go ahead and trim that. So it's been about 15 to 20 minutes that this lavash dough has rested in its final spreaded shape. We're gonna go ahead and trim the edges using a pizza cutter. You can use a knife for this. And this is not necessary. It's just gonna make it look a little bit cleaner, a little nicer, our final crackers. And this you can really cut into any shape you want. We can finish them with some seeds. I have some sesames here. You really just sprinkle them on. I'm gonna finish some with poppy as well. All right, so here we have our final baked crispy lavash. So go ahead, taste these. Perfect, great texture. They're perfect for dips. They're also great because they are baked crisp. So if you keep them in an airtight container, they'll last for weeks. Also pretty simple. We're gonna take a whole wheat dough and we're gonna roll this out pretty much to the length of the breadstick that we're looking for. This is all the same thickness. We're gonna let this rest in place so that when we cut our breadsticks, they don't spring back too much. All right, so we have our rested breadstick dough. We're gonna go ahead and cut these, get them ready for the bake. I'm just gonna use a pizza wheel here, and we're gonna cut strips. We roll this out to about 1/4 inch. I'm gonna cut these at about 1/4 inch as well. So theoretically, the cross section here is gonna be like a square. So we have our sheet tray here. I'm going to take the breadsticks that we cut and just spread them out here. If there's some thick parts, you can kind of stretch those out a little bit. You can finish these with whatever you'd like. You can finish them with a little bit of salt. I'm going to finish some with some poppy and some with sesame. Here we have our final breadsticks fresh out of the oven. They look really good. We got a nice even brown color on them. It's a credit to the shaping. We're going to go ahead and give them a try. That's what you want to hear when you break a breadstick. Perfect. Really great flavor. You can taste all the fermentation in them, but you still get a really great snap, really great crisp from the thin shape and the nice even bake. Pita is an easy bread to make. We're going to start with a round pre-shape on this. We're using our 80% hydration white wheat dough. All right, so we have our round pita shape that has relaxed and we've spread it a little bit. It's relaxed for about 15 to 20 minutes just to make it a little easier to extend. So we're gonna go ahead and roll this out into its final pita shape. Pretty much that's what we're looking for. We just want about a 6-inch round on that. Here we have our pita out of the oven. You can see it's still pretty light. It's a really thin bread. You bake it a minute too long and you wind up having a cracker. So you can see here how thin it is and also that we do have a nice little pocket in there that separates out. So we're gonna taste this. It's got a nice pull to it, again, from the structure that we created in the shaping. Great. Ready for falafel. The next bread we're gonna shape is a pizza. You may have heard of it. It's another type of flatbread that you will find mostly in Italy and especially in New York. No shade to Chicago, but we're going to start the pizza with a round pre-shape. So I have my piece of dough. I'm using about 500 grams of dough here. I am using a high hydration dough here, so a white wheat dough. We don't need to build a lot of strength in this because we're just going to be spreading it out. All right, so here's our round pre-shape of the pizza dough. We've let that rest for about 15 to 20 minutes. So first thing I'm going to do is just pat that down a little bit, get some of those larger air bubbles out, and then I'm going to start working that into a circle. You'll see in pizza shops a lot of the time they'll pick it up. This is just another way of spreading the dough in a nice even round and keeping a little rim on it there. And we're gonna go ahead and put that right on the pizza tray here. Today we're just gonna finish ours with a little bit of rosemary. You could also brush this with some olive oil if you'd like. You can finish it with some salt. So once you have your toppings on the pizza, this can go right into the oven. All right, here we have our pizza out of the oven. We got some nice rise on this, so that looks really great. You have a nice open crumb structure on the crust part. We have some nice color going here on the bottom, shows it's a really good bake. We'll give you a nice little crunch on that. You'll have a nice chew on the crust, and you have a delicious pizza. So we looked at over 20 breads today, and while it might not be every bread, between the pre-shapes and final shapes, you now know how shape affects the structure, texture, and ultimately the taste of a bread.
Okay, so those are 20 types of bread shapes. Okay, so each one is following the classic shaping, French classic shapes of their breads. Okay, so these are shaped in very uniquely, so that each one will have their own structure, each one will have their own texture. So kunyari, your bagel will have a different structure in texture from your brioche ate. Okay, so it will have a different look to it from your braid. Okay, so each one will have their own shape and way of or technique of creating that or bread shape altogether. Okay, so when we move into, so that's the art of bread making. Okay, so aside from the ingredients, you need to know how to shape and mold the different types of bread. Hindi na kayo nagwagawa ng breadsticks lagi or baguette lang lagi, alam nyo. Okay, so or ball. There are so many different types of bread and bread shapes. Okay, when we're talking about pastry, okay, so the we will be specific on cakes and cupcakes. Okay, so this is where your artistry comes into play. Okay, the word cupcake is just rather recent, so it was just in the 1820s that it was published. Okay, so we start off kasi from your hands-on. I saw that you guys made a birthday cake. Okay, so let's start off again with how to decorate cakes. The different styles of putting in your buttercream, the different styles of putting in your decorations for the different types of cakes.
Hi, I'm Bill, and I've been a professional baker for over 10 years, and I'm going to show you how to frost every cake. Everyone has a different way of frosting cakes. I have some very specific and simple ones that I like to use, so that's what we'll do today. Cakes should look delicious first before anything else, and that's why I lean towards this sort of style of classic buttercream and textures, and there are incredible things that you can do with sugar and fondant and sculpture, but for me, I love making cake that looks just delicious. Here are the tools we use when decorating a cake with frosting. The first and foremost that you're going to need is a turntable. Next is the cardboard round that you're actually going to put the cake on with some tape to tape it to your turntable. I make most of my buttercreams with a paddle. You can get it super nice and airy and also push out some of the air and make it nice and smooth. I've got 2 offset spatulas, a small one for more detailed work, and then this size offset, which is sort of the workhorse of the whole operation,
Jolly and shelf-free for everybody. That's in protein, fiber, and antioxidants. Much healthy, yung ulam sa healthy Jolly.
Switch to Medical 400, the best medical. Starts working in as fast as 5 minutes.
Knife to level the cake, 2 sizes of spatulas, a small and a large, a bench scraper, and finally, piping bags and piping tips. This is what we'll use to decorate the cake after we get it all finished and put together. Let's get started. This is cream cheese frosting. So in order to frost a cake, you have to make frosting. There are 3 different kinds of frosting that I typically use. I'm going to start with cream cheese frosting. So this is room temperature cream cheese. It's very important to have it be room temperature, and you want it to get nice and light. So we're going to start that first. We're going to start adding room temperature butter. It is important that your cream cheese and your butter are the same temperature, that you're not trying to add a cold one into a warm one or vice versa. And the butter is going to be added in small amounts, so about a tablespoon at a time, letting it sort of beat in. The last thing you want is chunks of butter in your cream cheese buttercream. Patience is key. It takes a long time to make cream cheese buttercream well. You want this to be super homogeneous, ready to mix in the cocoa and sugar. Alright, this looks great. As you can see, it's now super light, super fluffy, and I'm going to mix in my cocoa first. Very slow, so you don't do that. There we go. I'm going to add in the sugar in about 3 batches, just not to make a huge mess. It looks like a lot of sugar. It is not going to seem like a lot of sugar when it's fully incorporated, though. Like I said, it's a lot of sugar. The final addition of the sugar, and I'm going to go ahead and add in 2 teaspoons of salt too. That's the other key to a great buttercream, is a lot of salt. We'll want this to run to start to dissolve the sugar. You don't want to sort of taste the chalkiness of confectioner sugar in your buttercream. You want it to be super incorporated and really smooth and creamy. And that's cream cheese frosting. This is American buttercream. American buttercream is super simple. It is butter and sugar. The trick is beating your butter and your sugar long enough to get it super, super fluffy. You want to get this totally smooth, really nice and light before you go ahead and add the sugar. We're about halfway there. Make sure that all of your butter gets to be nice and light and beat. It's starting to look nice and silky and light, fully changed color. I'm going to add the sugar in a few batches so as not to make a huge mess. For my American buttercream, I use a pretty standard ratio of 3 parts butter to 4 parts sugar. It's going to almost look like a dough as you start to bring it together. It will get super light, I promise. Now it's totally brought together. It's made this super thick paste. We're going to start kicking it up to beat some air into it. This is about the time you can just go ahead and add your salt. You can just sort of watch it change. You want it to beat into kind of a cloud, just like a really fluffy, easy to work with buttercream. It's going to also feel like it's beating for a long time. Alright, we're getting there. So you can kind of take this and feel it in your fingers. I'm still feeling a little bit of the sugar. We'll keep it going for just a bit longer, but not much at all. So this is a classic American buttercream base. To here we could add vanilla, we could add booze, you can add any kind of things to flavor it. Today I'm going to add some freeze-dried powdered strawberry. And that's American buttercream. This is Swiss meringue buttercream. The difference between Swiss meringue and cream cheese or American buttercream is that the base for this is cooked egg whites and sugar into a meringue with the fat, the butter fat beat into it. What is great about this is it's super stable. It's also nice and glossy and kind of can get really smooth on a cake, so it is a little fancier. To start this, I'm going to use some egg whites, a double boiler. I'm going to use the bowl right from the mixer. Pot of simmering water, add my egg whites, granulated sugar, and I'm just going to mix that up. You want to take this to about 140 degrees. You don't even need a thermometer really for this. You can kind of do it by feel and touch. I can still feel a little bit of sugar, so I'm going to take it a little bit longer. But you can see how it's getting a little frothy and fluffy. This looks great. I'm going to throw this right into the mixer. We are going to use the whisk attachment this time, not the paddle. The slower and more gradual that you bring this to being a stiff meringue, it's going to have more structure because the bubbles, the air bubbles and the air pockets are going to be just a little bit smaller and you're kind of building it up gradually. So this is getting super glossy and fluffy. It is going to take a minute to come up to a real full stiff peak, and you also want to be able to feel the bottom of the bowl, and this is still really hot. You want this to be totally room temperature, not warm at all before you start adding this room temperature butter. Again, we're going to stand here and watch it mix for a long time. It's not quite stiff yet, but it is getting there. All right, it's stiff, it's glossy, it's beautiful, it is totally room temperature, and I'm going to start adding in the butter piece by piece. As you can see, it's starting to become stiff and cloud-like. It is essentially the color of the butter. Add a little bit of vanilla extract to make super classic vanilla buttercream, and again, salt, of course, salt. Oh, it smells so good. Just scrape it down, make sure it's all totally incorporated. It's so glossy and so beautiful. And that's Swiss meringue buttercream. This is petals. One exciting and beautiful way to finish your cake is what we call petal finish, done with a combination of a piping bag and an offset spatula. It is a little time consuming, but it is incredibly simple. So for this finish, you're going to start by piping. I have a large round tip, and I am going to pipe a line directly up the cake, equal sizes, and then you take your offset spatula and you just drag your spatula through half of the dot, scraping off your spatula in between each one, which is why it is a bit time consuming. And then your next row goes right where you scraped off. Try and keep them as close to the same size as possible, all the way around the cake. You can call this petals or fish scales. Looks so much more impressive than it is difficult. This can be fun with alternating colors, tonal colors. So the last row is the trickiest one. You kind of just have to sneak this in and hide it. It's never going to be perfect. And that's petals. This is a horizontal texture with a spiral on top. I'm just going to take some American buttercream, and this cake has been crumb coated. So I'm going to slap a little bit on here just to give myself a little more to work with. This buttercream is a beautiful texture. So because we are going to do a texture on the side of this, it doesn't have to be the cleanest. So I'm just going to use the tip of this offset, and I'm going to put it right on the side of the cake. And I'm going to just quickly just go straight up the side of the cake, dragging my tip. And then you're just going to finish off the top as usual, nice and flat and even. And then you can do the same exact thing, but just on the top. So just go all the way around in a spiral on the top of the cake. And that is a horizontal texture with a spiral on top. This is vertical. Continuing on with textured buttercreams, again, American buttercream, super easy, classic way is a quick vertical. I'm just going to make sure my spatula is nice and clean, and I'm just going to run my spatula up the side of the cake. Now, it doesn't matter if you get this little lip on the top, we're going to kind of clean it all up at the end. You just go around, and you can probably get 2 or 3 swipes out of it before you have to clean your spatula. Buttercream is so flexible, you can do it multiple times. I mean, if you didn't like the way that this came out, smooth it out again, maybe add a little extra kind of little coat on there, and then just do it again. It can be reworked and worked again. And with this, I like to kind of juxtapose it with its nice smooth top. I think that this texture really leans itself to simplicity. Like I said, rustic, simple, easy. And that's vertical. This is diagonal texture. All right, now we're just going to do a diagonal. And I think that the easiest way to do this is to start at the bottom and go diagonally towards you as you kind of turn the table. So we can just kind of go like this. The key to this is trying to keep them all at a similar angle. Again, not being super concerned with the top because we're going to clean that up at the end anyhow. And I think if they're kind of multi-widths and overlapping, looks really great with this. The key is to just sort of take it all the way to the top of the cake rather than having it stop partway. If you don't get it all the way up to the top on the first go around, just go back around and hit it again. Super simple. And then, there we go. And that's diagonal texture. This is swooshes and peaks. So this is a crumb-coated cake. I'm just going to kind of lay on some more buttercream, starting from the top. This cake is cold out of the fridge, which is a great way to start with a cake. So after you've crumb-coated it, stick it in the fridge or even in the freezer if you have space. You don't want this to be insanely thick because there already is a nice layer of buttercream on this cake, but you do want enough soft buttercream to be working the texture into. Again, we're going to make sure we build it up above the top level of the cake, giving ourselves a little crown to work off of. I'm just going to start kind of paletting with the end of my spatula. You don't want it to be a regular sort of up and down, just kind of a random paletted sort of up and down swooshing texture all over the cake. You don't want to just use the tip because you'll end up with these lines, which we will use later on, but if you use a little bit farther back on the spatula, you can get these nice, big, wide, swooping palette marks, and that's what we're going for right there. It should look unintentional, but intentionally unintentional. And I'm going to just finish off the top like we did on the base coat, dragging it, getting it nice and smooth. And then I'm just going to work these edges out. I'm taking the excess buttercream off of my spatula every time I use it so that you're not accidentally dragging more on where you didn't want it. It just gives you a little bit more control if you don't have a ton of buttercream on your spatula. So just take a step back, make sure that it's staying level, that it's looking straight up and down. Kind of look and see where you need to just work it a little bit more. And then you just have to find a point where you decide it's good. This is kind of the classic birthday cake to me, is this rough kind of swooping texture. If you don't have an offset spatula, you can use the back of a big spoon. And it's the same thing. You can either lay it on, take it off, but the back of the spoon will also give you enough control to kind of make this rustic texture. And that is swooshes and peaks. This is waves. Another super simple texture is sort of a wave horizontal pattern. Similarly, we're going to lay it on and take it off. So we have a nice base layer on top of our crumb coat. We've got it nice and smooth. So now we're just going to go ahead and mark the cake. And I'm going to kind of just do short little passes all the way up the side of the cake. And if you get too much buttercream, make sure you scrape it off. But you shouldn't be taking off too much buttercream with this. We're going to kind of alternate this, so I'm going to make sure my next one goes kind of in between. Again, a super rustic, very simple way of decorating a cake. Doesn't require any tips or any piping bags. Just going all the way around the cake. And that is waves. This is zigzag. Super easy. It can be done in one continuous motion. Just kind of an easy, rustic, fun, fast way to finish a cake. Any of these horizontal textures sort of cover any number of sins. So if you do have your cake kind of a little messed up, these are some great ways to kind of fix that. So I'm just going to use just the tip of my offset spatula, and I'm just going to go like this all the way around. And again, all the way up. Another easy and beautiful way to finish a cake is just to shave some chocolate. This is just a dark chocolate bar, a vegetable peeler, and you can kind of just give it some chocolate shavings right on the top. I love doing chocolate shavings or chocolate sprinkles on a chocolate cake. I think the chocolate on chocolate always looks nice. And there we go. Another easy rustic cake finish. And that is zigzag. This is smooth finish. Now we're going to do a smooth-sided cake. We're going to be using the Swiss meringue buttercream. I'm going to do a rough coat again and then smooth it out using a bench scraper. With the Swiss meringue, in order to get a really smooth finish, I'm sort of working this with my spatula to push some of the air bubbles out so that when we're finishing the coat, you're not catching all these big air bubbles and disrupting your nice smooth finish. So I'm going to lay it on really thick and then take it off because we're really going to try and get this as smooth as possible. The Swiss meringue is so nice to work with. It's so easy to build up your nice border on the top to kind of give yourself as much ability to kind of cut that corner really beautifully. We're going to try and make this as crisp and clean as possible. So I'm going to do as much smoothing as I can with my offset. That's a total personal preference. I'm going to kind of fill in where I've got these little holes on the side. So now that I've got it pretty much smooth, I'm going to finish it and try and get it as super crisp as I can with this bench scraper. So I'm going to hold this bench scraper exactly straight up and down, holding it not too close to the side and not too perpendicular to it. I'm going to kind of go at about a 45-degree angle, and I'm going to try and do as big and long of a stroke with my turntable as possible. You don't want to kind of keep doing these short ones because you're going to get these skips and jumps in the buttercream. You kind of want to be able to take one big long swoosh. And this is why we really wanted to lay it on thick, so you have this kind of room to pull off as much buttercream as you can to get it super smooth while still having a nice coat on the outside and not getting it too thin. That is looking pretty smooth. And you can go back in with a super clean spatula to kind of give it a little bit of touch-ups here and there. I'm just going to make sure that my spatula's really got nothing on it so that I have the cleanest edge possible. And I can just kind of smooth out some of these tiny little imperfections. So now that we've got the sides nice and smooth, I'm going to do the same for the top. I'm going to come in from the side and cut off that buttercream, giving ourselves a nice kind of crisp edge there. So you're going to give it one pass to kind of rough it in and sort of get that bulk of that off. And then you can go back in if you're trying to be super crisp with a small offset and really get that edge and smooth out that top. Make sure you clean off your spatula in between every pass. See how I've got this little kind of divot in the top? Easy, just put a little extra in there and then smooth it right over. The great thing about a smooth cake is now you have a totally blank palette that you can do anything. You can decorate it, you can pipe on it, you can do whatever. And I really love to add sprinkles, and I like sprinkles on the side of a cake. And a good trick for doing that is to set your cake stand right in a sheet tray to catch your sprinkles as you do this. And I got some sprinkles right here. I'm going to take them in my hand, a decent amount, and I'm slowly going to pack them on the sides of the cake. You could do the whole cake, you can do part of a cake. I think we're going to go about halfway up. It doesn't have to be perfectly even. You're just kind of giving it this fun party vibe. I love sprinkles. And that is smooth finish. This is a cake cone.
Doble tibay ang Bear Brand Sterilize. Tumutulong laban sa pagod at sakit.
Another great way of adding some texture to the side of the cake, very easy, is...
Okay, so from the start until this point, the hardest to actually make is the smooth cake. Okay, so yun yung pinakamahirap gawin, yung smooth cake, kasi it needs practice, it needs the proper touch, and you need to have the right tools. Okay, yung offset spatula is one of the most ideal tools that you can get if you want to pursue pastry. Okay, so having a nice offset spatula and knowing how to control it, okay, plus your turntable, these are your basic pastry tools. Okay, etong next section are the more difficult kasi you need precise movements, okay, for this next set.
A cake cone. So here we have a smooth-sided cake laid it on a little bit thicker than I normally would because you're going to dig into it with this textured comb, similar to using a bench scraper, but this is going to add a little bit of texture to the side. It's incredibly easy and can make your cakes look very fun. This is just sort of a simple scallop, but they come in all sorts of different profiles, so there's a lot of fun ways to do this. Again, you're not trying to take off a ton of buttercream, so don't have it perfectly perpendicular to the side of your cake, sort of just at a slight angle, and you're going to dig into the cake. Careful not to press it all the way in so you're touching the cake itself. You want to just be texturing the outsides of the buttercream, but you do want the full profile of the comb to be in the buttercream. And then you're slowly just going to drag it. Again, trying to take long swipes with your turntable to not get stops and hitches. And that's going to start to texture the sides of the buttercream. And what you can do is just clean this off and then take another swipe at it. Again, one of those really simple ways to make your cakes look super professional and finished without actually having to do some hard technical things. And that's a cake comb. This is piping. The way to finish a cake after we've got the base coat on is piping, and there are infinite amount of piping tips and ways to pipe and techniques to pipe. I'm going to do just a few simple ways to use a piping bag and piping tips to make cakes look beautiful. There are a bunch of different kinds of piping bags. I like to use these disposable. This is an 18-inch bag. I've got sort of a standard round tip. This is a 807, so it's about that big around. It's kind of a multi-use workhorse of a tip. So I'm going to cut off a portion of the plastic, probably about that much. Open the bag, drop the tip in, and then just work it to the bottom, like that. There are a couple ways you can fill a bag. I typically just do it in my hand. You want to kind of get your hand in a C form, holding the bag open, keep it open and nice and neat as possible. You want to start filling the piping bag closer down to the tip. You don't want to kind of have too much bag that you're trying to pack the icing into, just to keep it tidy. And then just a rubber spatula, a big one I like to use. And then this is just American buttercream. And take a dollop of the buttercream and press it neatly into the bag, like so. And then I'm going to repeat that until the bag is filled. So once you've got it filled, all you're going to do, and then give it a couple twists. And there you go. We're ready to start piping. This is writing on a cake. We can't talk about decorating a cake without talking about writing on a cake. It is something that can be pretty tricky, but doesn't have to be. You can do block letters, you can do script. Today I'm using a little bit of a wider tip, just to kind of make it a little more bold and graphic, but you can use anywhere from like a tiny, tiny, tiny pin dot to, this one's kind of on the larger side. It's always helpful to practice. Oftentimes I will trace the diameter of the cake out on a piece of parchment paper with a Sharpie and then just sort of, practice a couple times on that. You're not wasting buttercream. You can always scrape it off of the parchment paper and throw it back into your bowl. Again, if you mess it up on the top of the cake, I have done that a million times. You just scrape it off, clean the cake up a little bit, and go for it again. It's really not the end of the world. So I'm gonna just do a quick and simple happy birthday. Now, if that happens, it's very easy sometimes, it's easier if your cake is cold, to slide your little offset, just sort of drag it back into place. And you can just kind of, in the end, you're not really even going to see it at all. And then just keep going. You want to use as even pressure as you can. Go as slow as you want. Think about the angle of your letters. You want kind of everything to be on a straight line and nice and tidy. And if you get a break in it, if there's a bubble in your piping bag, that's okay, just fill it in. A little dot on your eye, cross on the T, tuck it in, and there you go. This is a round tip dot border. Keeping with the simplicity theme here, one of my favorite ways to finish a cake is with our round tip again, and it's just a simple dot border. I think it goes super well with this vertical texture on the outside of this buttercream. So I'm just gonna give a small dot and pull up. The key is to pull up while you're still applying slight pressure, and also trying to keep every dot the same size, which can be a little tricky, and if you don't keep it the same size, it's fine. It can be slightly time consuming. My cake decorating style tends to lean towards the grandma, so this definitely fits in with that. And that's a round tip dot border. This is a star tip shell border. One of the most classic finishing techniques is a shell border. It's, you know, your classic grocery store cake, your local bakery, and it's super simple. I have that smaller star tip in, and I'm going to just do a simple shell border. So you kind of just give a little dot and drag, all the way around, just trying to keep it as even as possible, both even in how close it is to the edge of the cake and the size of the shell itself. I really feel like you can put whatever combo you want together. I don't think I've ever done this combination before, but it looks good together, or it's whatever you want to do. And that's a star tip shell border. This is a round tip cupcake. Another vital skill is how to ice a cupcake, and there are many ways of icing a cupcake. This is a sort of classic way of icing a cupcake, simple, clean. I'm going to use a round tip and a small offset. So in order to do this, you just take your cupcake, take your large round tip, right in the center, and put a big dollop right there. Take your small offset, push it into the center, and swoop it around. And again, just a big dollop, and then a swoosh with your spatula. Nice and clean and tidy, classic cupcake. And that is a round tip cupcake. This is a large star cupcake. Another great classic way to ice a cupcake is a large star tip. This is a technique I've used at most of the bakeries I've worked at. It is super simple, very classic. You just take your large star, right in the center, and then just go around and finish off with a little drag of a tail. Something clean and simple, and it's the right amount of icing on a cupcake. And that is a large star cupcake. This is a small star cupcake. One easy, quick, and fun technique to use is just small little dollops. The teeth on this star are smaller. You can just do little dollops, kind of random. Some people try and make this look like little cactuses. I try and not pile too much buttercream on a cupcake. I think that you really need the right cake to buttercream ratio, and that is a small star cupcake. This is a petal tip and ribbon tip. Two other classic tips. I've got an open petal tip and a ribbon tip here that's got some teeth. It'll be interesting to kind of have them side by side. We've got a bunch of different things you can do with these, but one of my favorite things to do is with this petal tip is a little bit wider at one side and pointed at the top, kind of teardrop shape. When I'm going to pipe this sort of ruffle or ruffly ribbon technique, put the thicker part on the bottom. You could do this horizontally on the side of a cake. You could do this on the top of a cake. It's kind of versatile. This is also the same tip that you would use to make buttercream flowers. So I am going to show you a little ruffle technique, starting kind of just going like that, a nice even texture, even pressure rather. And this can be, you can do it kind of like tighter, wider, really handy. Similarly, with this ribbon tip, you can do the exact same technique, just totally different look. So this, I'm going to do the same thing, but it's got teeth, and you can do it as tight as you want. You can kind of space it out to make a bigger zigzag. You can also lay this one flat. You can kind of get a nice even pull. Or you can do a similar technique to the shell. Lots of different options with these. Another great technique with this little ribbon is you can do a basket weave texture. So alternating, you're just going to do every other basket and then across and then just a little woven texture. There are an infinite number of tips. You can use them in any number of techniques. These are just a few easy, simple, classic ones. And that's a petal tip and ribbon tip. And that's how you frost every cake. Of course, this isn't every way you can ice a cake, but this is a real great kind of basic, classic, useful set of techniques that I think are fun and easy and a great base of skills to have. These are hopefully encouraging and not intimidating, and you should be able to at least attempt them at home. You can always start again, you can always get better, you can always fix your mistakes. There are really no rules. It should be just simple and fun.
New Carnation Nevada. Angat sa Milky Namnam, kaya
Okay, so ang daming pwedeng gawin from your rough frosting. Okay, so yung parang mga classic rough frostings of waves, of vertical, horizontal lines, to your smooth cakes with your ribbon tops, with your button tops. Okay, so these are different ways of putting frosting into your cake. So kasama rin dito yung piping in cupcakes. Okay, but when piping, there are so many tips and tricks that you guys can do. Not only using a single flavored buttercream. So this next clip, okay, so medyo maraming clips tayo today kasi it's all about technique. Okay, so this next clip will show you some tips and tricks in piping.
Hi guys, and welcome back to my channel and welcome back to my Back to Basics tutorials. This tutorial is all about piping. A lot of you requested this because I think piping looks very easy, but when it comes to actually doing it, it takes a lot of practice and people don't really know where to start. So I thought I'd do this tutorial to explain how 4 different types of piping tips work and what you need to look out for and bear in mind when you pipe. For this tutorial, I'm using a batch of my American buttercream. You can use pretty much any buttercream or even ganache as long as it's a nice pipeable consistency. So I'm starting off with a few different colours of my buttercream. I've got some piping tips here which I'll go through in detail when I use them. And I'm going to start by filling up some piping bags because of course that's a great place to start. What I also have is a tool cup because this really comes in handy when you fill up a piping bag. People tend to cut the tip off their piping bag before they put the piping nozzle in. The problem with this is that you may cut it too large or too small. So what I like to do is put the piping tip in first and then cut around it like this. When you're cutting the end of the piping tip, you have to ensure that the shape of the piping tip is exposed at the end, because otherwise the piping bag will get in the way when you're trying to pipe out your buttercream. So go around with your scissors and the tip of the piping bag should come off just like this, and that's ready to use. What I'm going to do is put the piping bag inside the cup, which frees up my hand and makes it easier to fill. So I'm going to start with some pink buttercream, which I'm going to spoon in just on the side because I'm actually going to add a little bit of white as well to give the buttercream a little bit more depth when I pipe it. So when I take out the piping bag, you can see the top of the piping bag is actually clean of buttercream because I folded the piping bag down around the cup. I'm now going to gently squeeze the buttercream towards the piping tip, obviously being careful that it doesn't come out the other end, and go in with my next tip. So as you can see, I'm folding the bag down the sides of the cup because it keeps them nice and clean. And I'm going to repeat the same and fill the 4 different piping bags with the 4 different colours. still adding a little bit of white every time. You'll see the effect when it comes to piping. Something to also bear in mind is that once the buttercream is in your piping bag, it's almost like it's airtight. So it's better to leave the buttercream in the piping bag rather than out in the bowl, because especially with American buttercream, it tends to cross over. Whereas once it's in the piping bag, it's nice and airtight, and when it comes to piping, it's as if it's fresh. So here are the 4 bags, and now let's get piping. So every piping tip has a number, so you know which one I am using. So I'm going to start off with the 1M. This is a classic cupcake tip. I feel like every cake decorator owns one of these. It's a nice open star shape, and you get some really nice rosettes with it, especially on top of cupcakes. So the best way to hold and use a piping bag is to twist the top, because you don't want the buttercream coming out of the other end of the piping bag, and almost cup your hand and place the majority of the buttercream in the palm of your hand, and then you're squeezing your fingers, and that is the action, and that's where all the pressure comes from. So don't worry too much about the end with the piping tip. Also, something to note, it's a lot easier to use a piping bag that's less full. So if you are new to piping, then only fill up your piping bags about halfway, and you can always refill them as you go. So the part that people struggle with the most when it comes to piping is not actually pressing the buttercream through hard enough. So I'm going to show you what happens when you press the right amount. So again, it's a lot more than you think you should be pressing. You can see when I start to push the buttercream through, I'm getting this really rounded, full shape of the buttercream. And this 1M tip actually creates a really nice ruffled effect just by squeezing and keeping your hand still. And I'm going to show you what happens if you just do one little squeeze as well. You get a nice star shape, but it's not as full. So of course it depends on what you're using this for, but in general, people don't squeeze hard enough. So now I'm going to show you a few rosettes using the same tip. A rosette is a little swirl. So it's not exactly a cupcake swirl that goes on and on and on. It's just one small circle like this, and finish it off with a flick. So that flick is going in the same direction that I was piping. So I'm basically piping a very small O shape, and when I get back to where I start, I stop squeezing the buttercream, but flick off in the same direction. And you can see I've got 3 nice rosette shapes. Just a side note, piping is practice. I've done this many of times, so don't worry if you don't get these perfect rosettes on your first try. And just to show you a couple of different piping actions using the same tip, I'm going to show you how to make scrolls. So rather than holding the piping bag perpendicular to where you're piping like I was doing before, you actually hold it more to the side, and you do a sort of wave action. You go up and then down, and when you come down, you stop squeezing and pull the piping bag away. And if you do them continuously, you achieve a border, which is very common to use at the bottom of cakes. Now, if you change the direction of these scrolls every time, you get this sort of plaited effect, which is also used as a nice border on a cake. So here are 5 examples of using the same tip and showing you the different effects it can make. So the next piping tip I'm going to show you is a 4B. Now it's also referred to as a French star tip. So it's another star tip, but it's got a lot more spikes, so the effect is different. And once again, I'm holding the piping bag in the palm of my hand and piping perpendicular to the tray. I'll show you a simple star to begin with, just to show you the difference in this tip to the last. And for me, this is a perfect topper for a mini cupcake. I'm also going to show you what happens when I do the same rosette action with this tip. So once again, doing this small circular action and finishing off with a flick when I stop squeezing. So you can see that the shape of the rosette is a lot more intricate. Both look nice. I think I just prefer this one. So I'm going to show you the scrolls once again, but using this different tip, and you can see the difference between them. The scrolls are a lot more refined, and I think also a little bit neater. Another border that you can definitely try with any tip, but I'm going to show you with this one, is the loop. So once again, you're piping at a diagonal, and it's going to be a little bit of concentration, especially if you're going around a whole cake, but you're basically going to be piping continuously in a circle action. So you're going up and around and down again, up and around and down again, repeatedly. Now, if you were to pipe this around the top of a cake, it's a gorgeous way to finish a cake off. I've obviously shown you just a small amount to show you what the piping tip does, but have a go at this, because it's a really easy way to achieve an amazing effect on top of a cake. What I also love doing with this tip, especially when I'm piping meringues, is creating little hearts. So it's similar to what I was doing with the scrolls before, but just 2 smaller scrolls and one pointing in a different diagonal, and you get a cute heart shape, which looks really sweet on its own if it was made of meringue, for example, but if you piped it on top of a cake, then you get a heart-themed cake. So you can add different decorations to a cake just with the use of piping. So this next piping tip has got to be my favourite. It's very similar to the last one I just showed you, but it's much smaller. This is the PME 13, and this is what I finish most of my cakes off with. Because it's so small, the details are so much more intricate than the other piping tips. So even if you're sticking to simple stars like this, if you put lots of them together, it can be really effective. Now, of course, because this is a smaller piping tip, with the rosettes, I have to do them even smaller. However, don't forget to really push that buttercream through, because otherwise you don't get that bulbous shape at the bottom. You want every piping detail full, and that comes from the pressure you squeeze with your hand. So here, for example, I'm going to do a few rosettes and then go in with a collection of stars, and when you put the two together, it just creates a really nice pattern, which I'm sure you've seen on top of my other cakes. So when you do the scrolls with this piping tip, like I said, it's smaller and more intricate, so this is more commonly used for a border around a cake. Whether you do the scrolls in a straight line or crisscrossed or even the circular loop, just bear in mind that it's not going to appear as big as the other tips did because it is a smaller tip. And to get finer details, like in all aspects of cake decorating, does take a lot more practice. But once you get the hang of it, I'm sure this tip will become your best friend too. So the last tip I'm going to show you is a 104, which is also called a petal tip. And it's shaped almost like a teardrop. Now I say teardrop is because when you use this tip, the small part of the tip has to face upwards or away from the surface that you're using. Well, depending on what shape. So for example, if you wanted to do a ruffle, which I'm going to show you how to do now, you want the small part of the tip facing upwards. So what I'm going to do is position the piping bag on its side and keeping the pressure even as I pipe, just go side to side and start to create this lovely ruffled effect. Now, because of the way I've put in the different coloured buttercream, I'm actually getting a really nice depth to it too. So you can see that the white buttercream is almost outlining this shape. This way of piping looks really nice on top of desserts, for example, but also amongst other piped details on top of cakes and cupcakes. So the reason why it's called a petal tip is because you can actually form flower petals with it. If you place the tip on its side and pipe an upside down U shape, you get a petal. Now, I know I've said piping is practice 3 or 4 times already, but this is where it really comes into practice. Even I'm still getting used to piping in this way. It's all about keeping the pressure even and consistent as you pipe. So rather than doing individual petals like I did first, if you want to try a continuous one, you get another type of ruffle, which also looks nice on top of a cake, as well as forming flower shapes. And I'll just show you again what I did. So the piping bag is almost laying on its side. You're going up and down, and if you change the direction of how you're piping, different sorts of petals form. So if you start to angle the piping bag away from the surface, you get a deeper petal. Whereas if you keep the piping bag flat, it's more flat, but still has a 3-dimension to it. So I recently did the tutorial of a piped cake, which is basically where I combine all of these piping techniques all over the surface of the cake, which looks really effective. So I'm just going to do a little sneak peek of it here, just to show you what happens when you combine all of these piping tips together. When you are combining the piping tips and you do want to use this petal tip, I would recommend doing it first because of the angle of the piping bag. You can't really fill in gaps with it because you need a 360 access. So I started off with a few random squiggles, which indeed look very random at the moment, but as I start to fill in the empty space with the other piping tips, it starts to pack out. So because I was low on buttercream, I simply just squeezed whatever I had remaining into the other piping bags. But again, this is just to show you what happens when you start putting all these different shapes together. So I have the 1M there, and now I'm going on with a 4B, and all these star shapes are the same, but because of the different sizes of the tips, they look different. And of course, when you add different colours to it, you create an amazing pattern and just continuously fill in the gaps until a textured surface is formed. So you can see that whether you're doing this on top of a smaller cake, a cupcake, or even a large cake, without using any other ingredients or decoration, you can decorate a cake just with different piping tips. So once again, practice makes perfect. The possibilities of piping are endless. If you want to practice and not want to waste any buttercream, then grab yourself either some whipped cream or even that instant mashed potato. I'm not even joking. It's a great way to practice piping without wasting a load of buttercream. So I hope you found this tutorial helpful. These are definitely the 4 piping tips that I would start off with if you want to practice some piping more. I've attached all the necessary links below, and of course, if you do try any of these techniques out, then please tag me at Georgia's Cakes on Instagram, and in the meantime, I'll see you soon for more tutorials.
Okay, I'll jump into another video because one of the problems of using the piping tip is it's not interchangeable. Okay, so once you put it inside, once you put your icing in on it, it's hard for you to replace your tip. Paano kung nagkamali, ay masyado para malaki. Okay, so there's a tool that they use called a coupler. where it acts as a temporary tip, and then from the coupler you add in your stainless tip. So with the coupler, you can actually replace your tip every now and then.
And see what we can do.
Let me tell you about my best friend. His name is Billy.
Let's talk about couplers. A coupler is a small plastic piece. Not interested, eh? A coupler is a small piece of plastic. It looks a little like a pastry tip, and a pastry tip screws onto the end. It allows you to change tips without changing the pastry bag. So if you just put a tip directly into the bottom of a pastry bag, that works great. But if you're ever doing a big project where you're using lots of colors or lots of shapes, the coupler can really come in handy. So to fit the pastry bag with a coupler, you just cut the end off. You place the coupler into the pastry bag until the end of it sticks out like that. Then your pastry tip goes on the end, and you use the plastic ring to screw it in place. So when you want to switch the tip to have a different one, you just unscrew the plastic ring, remove the tip, and place your other pastry tip on. Right, Brennan? You done? One of the biggest questions I get about piping is, help, the piping, oh, hold on. Help, the frosting is always coming out of the back of my bag and I can't seem to control it. So the first reason that happens is that your bag is too full. Remember, only fill it about halfway full. This bag is too full right now, so when I go to squeeze, it's very difficult for me to wrap my hand around, and the more that I'm squeezing to pipe, frosting is coming out that backside because it's just too full. The other reason it can happen is you can be really, really tempted, even if you've got it all twisted the way you're supposed to. Sometimes people want to hold it down here like this because they feel like they have more precision to get exactly what they want. But when you're doing that, the pressure that you're applying here is forcing the frosting upward, 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 and eventually it is going to come out the back of the bag. So to avoid that, if you're feeling like you need to be holding it lower, just squeeze some of the frosting out of your bag to make it have a little bit less. Twist the bag really, really well, and remember, hold it up at that twist. Use that extra pastry bag as your grip. Then, nothing's moving out the back. And you're left with nothing but perfect piping. Just like that. Another one of the questions I get more often than anything else is how in the heck do I clean these pastry tips? My favorite method is to take the dirty pastry tip that's still filled with icing. I use my finger to push out as much of the icing as I possibly can, and then I put it directly into a small glass of very warm, even boiling water. The warm water loosens all the frosting that's inside and makes it much easier to rinse out the tip and then clean it with soap and water. High five? Can I paw? Give me your paw. Okay, a few things to know about pastry tips before we get started. Pastry tips come in lots of different shapes and sizes. There's usually a number on the side of the pastry tube that can denote the size. Here's 1, 2. However, the exact size isn't super important. It's more about the shape. If you're trying to imitate a look that was made with a star tip, you're going to want to use a star tip. And it is also important to remember that if you opt for a larger tip, that's going to require more icing. So if you pipe little tiny stars all around the cake, that'll use less icing than if you pipe big fat stars. So let's start piping with some round tips and see what kind of effects we can make. I'm going to...
Okay, so pretty much it's the same as the earlier ones. Okay, I just added that sequence about the tips. Okay, now let's do. I just still have a couple of clips. Okay, so I'll show you some creative ways of doing your pastry. Okay? In pastry, as I mentioned, it's a way of expressing oneself. So, an expression of the baker or the pastry chef. Okay, in such a way, in this way, you're not only stuck with a single layer. Kasi usually, ginagawa na is a cupcake, tapos meron ka lang frosting sa ibabaw. You can extend that way of expressing yourself in a much more deeper and a much more complex way. Okay, so in pastry, you can layer things up to create texture, volume, differences in color, differences in appearance. You can create things that might look something, but it actually are different things. Okay, so this is where the art is pushed to its limits. Okay, so let's see some decorative ideas.
Pantene. Enriched with pro-vitamins, iwas biglas, naman ang style.
Di na sapat ang painkillers? Baka may nerve damage. Take Doloneurobion.
Okay, so you can see how difficult some pastries can be and how detailed and complex the structures of some pastries are. Say, so may multi-layering, multi-texture, multi-prep. Okay, so you need to be able to think creatively to be able to come up with these different types of desserts. Okay, so hindi lang siya normal cupcake. Even nga sometimes your cupcake, meron pa siyang filling inside and then you have your meringue on top. So you can actually mix and match different types of textures, flavors to actually create your own dessert. Okay? So let's not be stuck with what is written in the recipe. Sometimes you need to go out and explore and try to look for what represents your idea. Okay? So to finish our lecture today, I'll leave you, okay, since we're in the bread and pastry section, I will leave you with a clip of how it is to work in a French bakery. Okay, so how early they start, what are their production, what's their production line per day, and then pretty much how they bake and produce and bake everything fresh on a daily basis. Okay, so for those na interested in pursuing an OJT or an internship in pastry, okay, pretty much this is what we will be encountering.
Salut tout le monde, it's Diane, and today we're going behind the scenes at a French bakery. Let's go. Okay, everyone knows that bread is a huge part of French culture. Something that rings true about French people is they love their bread. You'll see people with a baguette under their arm in the morning, in the afternoon. That's a real stereotype. But do you know how much work actually goes into making that beautiful bread and those beautiful pastries you see every day? Not sure if you do, and I don't know either. So let's go inside and get a behind-the-scenes look.
So first, a little background. This is Mr. Travers. He's the owner of Travers Bakery, what you're looking at right here, in Cholet, France. It's in the Pays de la Loire region. Bread in France is big business, and even on a slow day, this bakery still makes over 1,000 baguettes. They have a team of 25 employees that make bread, pastries, and more, and everything is done right here from scratch daily. Impressive, isn't it?
Okay, it's just after 4 a.m. and I'm here at the bakery at the back door behind me. I'm going to get started with the early morning team, see what they're up to. And just a quick note, this is a big bakery. They make all kinds of things, so of course they have a big team. Starting early is the norm, but having such a big team is not typical in France. It exists, of course, but a lot of bakeries are much smaller, and maybe they just have a baker and a cashier, another employee. So just wanted to point that out, that not all bakeries are like this, but let's head in.
After heading inside, I met the two bakers already hard at work, Quentin and Sylvain. You'll meet them in a second. I saw all kinds of bread and pastries in various stages of completion and gained an appreciation right away for the organization and precision that goes into getting the bakery ready for the morning customers.
Moi c'est Quentin, du coup là je suis en train de mettre au four les baguettes, tout ce qui est pain, baguette, baguette ordinaire. Et donc là c'est le premier four du matin, donc voilà, ça commence tranquillement. Et puis après il y a d'autres fours qui vont s'enchaîner avec d'autres différents pains, des pains spéciaux. Donc voilà. Oui, boulanger, ça fait 10 ans.
10 ans?
10 ans, oui.
Mais vous êtes jeune?
Je me fais jeune, oui, non, j'ai 26.
Quand même.
Oui.
Donc en France, vous commencez à 16 ans?
On commence à 16 ans, mais en apprentissage, donc on va à l'école en même temps.
D'accord.
Et 10 ans, après, ça fait 5 ans que je suis ouvrier, enfin à temps plein.
Donc moi c'est Sylvain, donc ici je suis boulanger. Tourrier aussi, donc ce qui est faire les croissants, toutes les viennoiseries. Et là, je suis en train de dorer la brioche, qui va aller ensuite au four, avec de la dorure, pour que ça lui donne un aspect brillant et tout. Moi, après le collège, j'ai fait un BEP boulanger, et après j'ai fait un bac pro aussi en boulangerie-pâtisserie. Et pour bien me former, j'ai fait 1 an en pâtisserie.
D'accord.
Comme ça, si parfois il faut donner des coups de main en pâtisserie, j'ai la formation. Ça peut pas nuire dans nos métiers de savoir un peu tout faire et tout. Ça peut être qu'un plus. Oui, ça on fait tous les matins. Ça c'est tous les matins, on fait en fonction des quantités, ça change tous les jours, en fonction des commandes. Et après, on prépare tout pour le magasin, pour ce matin, pour l'ouverture. Et après...
Empleyado na, mandinig mapa, laban lang with the fastest Alaksan FR.
Ensuite, on va préparer pour les commandes de demain. On va commencer déjà à préparer la journée de demain pour préparer pour demain matin.
Something I noticed right away is that they both knew exactly what to make and when, and moved seamlessly around the kitchen. They'd take baguettes, pastries, quiche, mini pizzas, and all kinds of things in and out of the oven like a perfectly timed dance. Everything you see is made 100% from scratch right here on the bakery's premises. No preservatives or additives are used, and let me show you some of the magic I was treated to this morning. And yes, everything smelled just as good as it looks.
Allez-y. Alors là c'est farine d'épeautre. Ça c'est la farine de seigle. Farine de maïs. C'est un mélange de farine normale et farine de seigle. Donc il y a un peu plus de farine blanche que de farine de seigle. Et puis il y a des graines de lin à l'intérieur. Ça, farine de tradition. Et celle-là,
c'est la farine de petit épeautre. Donc ça s'appelle la grille. Et en gros, en fonction des sortes de pain, on peut avoir un type de lamage différent. Et c'est ce qui va permettre en fait à la cuisson en fait de justement laisser la vapeur d'eau s'échapper en fait et de soulever et de développer en fait le pain. En fait, c'est ce qui va lui donner son aspect.
Just a quick note about the following clip. Sometimes bakeries have special names for their tradition baguettes that are unique to that particular bakery. You'll hear Quentin talk about baguettes called Saint-Pierre in Mauges. They're specific to this bakery, to Travers, so don't go to Paris and ask for a Saint-Pierre, okay?
C'est la baguette ancienne. En gros, c'est une farine de tradition. En fait, on a trois différentes baguettes en fait, de tradition. Donc l'ancienne, la Saint-Pierre et la Mauges. Donc les trois, en fait, on part sur la même farine en fait, de base. C'est juste le type de fermentation en fait, qui va changer en fait, sur les trois. Donc l'ancienne, ça va être un pointage en fait en bac, donc ce que j'ai utilisé en fait tout à l'heure. Ça a reposé en fait toute une nuit au frigo en fait. Et ce qui permet en fait à la levure en fait de faire son action et de laisser en fait fermenter lentement toute une nuit à 4 degrés. Donc après l'ancienne, la particularité c'est qu'on rajoute en fait de la semoule de pékin en fait. C'est ce qui permet en fait de donner un petit côté croustillant en fait à la cuisson. Ça c'est pour l'ancienne. Ensuite on a la Mauges, la baguette Mauges, que je vais mettre en 5 minutes au four. C'est pareil, c'est sur une farine de tradition. Là la seule différence qu'on va avoir c'est qu'on va partir sur une pouliche, puisque Sébastien expliquait tout à l'heure. Une pouliche, c'est un mélange d'eau et de farine, en fait, la même quantité d'eau pour la même quantité de farine, avec un tout petit peu de levure. Et on va aussi laisser fermenter ça, en fait, toute une nuit au frigo pour que ça développe tranquillement. Et ensuite, on va ajouter ce mélange-là à nos pétrins. Et c'est par ce biais de fermentation, en fait, qu'on va obtenir une mie qui est un peu plus aérée, on va rechercher un peu plus de conservation. Et voilà. Et la particularité de la Mauges, c'est qu'on rajoute en plus ça s'appelle de la gaude. En fait, c'est de la farine de maïs torréfiée. C'est assez brun, en fait, je pourrais vous la montrer tout à l'heure. Et ça va donner vraiment un petit goût particulier et une couleur, en fait, un peu plus brune, en fait, à la
Bah, ça se voit un peu moins, enfin on le voit un peu sur les côtés qu'elle est quand même assez jaune.
Et c'est quoi ça?
Donc baguette curcuma, donc c'est de la pareille farine de tradition, donc avec du curcuma, et c'est un mélange de noisettes et de noix en fait qu'on incorpore en fait en fin de pétrissage pour donner un petit goût puis des aromates.
While Quentin was tending to his bread, Sylvain was hard at work making his viennoiserie, brioche, and more.
Donc c'est le même sirop, du beurre, du sucre.
Non, là c'est des œufs battus, de la dorure. Et là c'est de la brioche vendéenne.
D'accord. Et quelle est la différence entre la brioche vendéenne et la brioche française normale?
La gâche.
La gâche, c'est quoi la gâche?
La gâche, il y a beaucoup plus de crème fraîche à l'intérieur.
D'accord.
Et la brioche vendéenne, bah, comme son nom l'indique, bah, c'est vendéen, c'est fait en Vendée. C'est la dernière feuilletée qu'on a tourée d'une façon, avec du sucre. On a fait le dernier tour dans le sucre. Et après, on l'a découpé en tout petites bandes. Et après, en cuisson, ça s'étale. Avec le feuilletage, ça gonfle et ça s'étale.
Certain things can be made in advance, or at least partially, to help streamline the morning process. Doughs need to be made the night before so they have time to rise. Pastry dough is also made in advance so it has time to chill in the refrigerator. Lots of prep work is done several hours before or even the night before so the morning routine runs smoothly.
Donc le feuilletage, on voit bien que le feuilletage a été bien respecté. On voit bien toutes les couches. Donc les couches beurre-pâte ont été faites comme il faut. Et là on a un pain chocolat réussi avec une belle couleur.
Here's a side of the bakery I've never seen before. All the cases are empty, but as different things become ready in the morning, they're moved little by little into the main store, getting ready for the morning customers. You'll notice that the design of this bakery is pretty cool. Look, you can see the bakers and the pastry chefs working in the back from the main store. See them through the glass? I also spent some time watching the pastry chefs work in another part of the kitchen. Everything they're making looks great, doesn't it? But it's too much to get into in this video, so I'm just giving you a taste of what they were up to. Let me know if you'd like to see more in an upcoming video, and maybe I'll just make it for you.
Alright, that wraps up my behind-the-scenes look at a French bakery. Thank you so much for watching. Be sure to subscribe for more videos on...
Okay, so that's a glimpse of a traditional classic pastry or boulanger restaurant, okay, store, okay. So you can see how small the team is. You have two guys for pastry, two guys for bakery, for bread baking. They start as early as 4 a.m. In some cases, they start 12 midnight, okay, for some proofing, or they proof some of their dough the day before, okay. So what's nice about a small shop like this is you get to experience everything, okay, as compared to a hotel na ang dami nyo, everybody's doing their small little thing. In this small types of restaurants, you are able to learn pretty much everything, okay, from preparation to finished product, from end to end, and you can experience pretty much everything, okay. So this is just a glimpse of what you guys will be facing when you start the internship, okay. So early mornings, the whole day prepping, hindi na yung maraming waiting time. Nakita na naman yung list of things that they need to do. So they have a big, huge board. Wait, let me look for it. Okay. They have a huge board of their production. Okay, where is it? There. Okay, this is their huge board of production. So lahat yan kailangan nilang tapusin before the first customer comes in the morning. Okay, so meron silang time-based deadline. Okay, hindi pwedeng, ay, mamayang hapon pa yan. Everything should be done. All these different types of bread should be done. And then listed are the number of things that they need to work on. Okay, so every day, ganyan yung routine nila. They wake up every day, every morning, trying to make fresh bread, fresh pastries, every day. Okay, so maraming prep work, maraming preparation, maraming proofing na gagawin beforehand. Okay, so hindi lang siya put in the oven. And then there are things na you cannot rush. Okay, so it's just a glimpse of the life of pastry. Okay, the artwork that comes into pastry, the challenges that pastry, if you are interested with the challenge you guys will be facing when you join a pastry department. Okay, so that's it for my lecture today. Okay, let's just do our second round of attendance. Okay, so I'll ask everybody to turn on their cameras again so that I can do a screenshot. Okay, before we go. Okay. So for those interested, this is my forte, pastry. This is not naman my forte, but this is what interested me in culinary pastry. Okay. Gusto ko kasi challenge na pa-perfect lahat. Okay, so yun yung mas gusto ko as compared to culinary. Okay? So let's everybody turn on your cameras. Gemma, Eden. Okay. Cyrus J and Kathleen. Okay, so Eden came in. Okay, Eden, are you there? Eden, yep. Okay, all right. Okay, let's do a quick screenshot. Okay, hopefully na ano kayo, medyo interested kayo in pastry. Okay, especially for the guys. Okay, just as a side note, okay, ang pastry hindi lang siya for girls. Kita nyo, mas maraming, if you work in a cruise liner, if you work in a, mas maraming guys in pastry. Okay, hindi ko alam bakit, but bakit nagkakaroon ng misconception na ang pastry is for girls. Okay, mas maraming pastry chef na lalaki than babae. Okay? Okay, so for guys, don't be disheartened na hindi pang babae lang ang pastry. For girls, they can still work in pastry and are parang equal na. Okay? So that's it. Let's screenshot. Okay, everybody.